It was December 2010 when Mohammed Bouazizi, a young man who came out of the university incredibly frustrated, had no opportunity, goes into the marketplace to sell fruits and vegetables. The authorities harass him. They steal his scale. He is so frustrated, he sets himself on fire. And that is the spark that ignites a generation. It ignites the frustration of a nation, and they rise up. And then there was something else. There was WikiLeaks, the whistleblower website. Why WikiLeaks? That released, millions of pages of documents about the Iraq War, about the Afghanistan War, State Department documents about our dealings with countries all over the world. The one that was founded by Julian Assange, who's now holed up in a lot of trouble in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. He's been granted political asylum to go to Ecuador, but if he steps out, he might be extradited to Sweden to answer questions about that two women have raised, whether he sexually abused them. Now, this is serious, and I think he should have to answer these questions, but he has never said he wouldn't. The media gets it wrong when they say he was charged. He hasn't been, so the evidence hasn't even risen to a charge. And even with a charge, you have to have a trial and then be found guilty. But there are questions. He has said he would answer questions of the Swedish authorities. The Ecuadorian government has intervened and said they will provide a space for those questions. He's even said he would go to Sweden, but only if he could get assurances that once in Sweden, he wouldn't be extradited to the United States. That is what he's concerned about. Why? Well, we know that in Alexandria, Virginia, there is a secret grand jury that's been impaneled going after Julian Assange and others volunteering with WikiLeaks. And we suspect there's a sealed indictment against him for treason. Why would he be concerned about being sent to the United States? Does the name Bradley Manning ring a bell for any of you? The young U.S. soldier who went to Iraq and what the U.S. government said he did. It's astounding that in a desert computer, bringing in a CD where he wrote the words Lady Gaga, he could download millions of pages of top secret U.S. government documents. I mean, this must be so humiliating to the U.S. government. And why are these documents important that were then released to WikiLeaks and they released them to the world? Well, I would say in a time when governments crack down on information, transparency is essential. And these documents, if we had seen them at the time they were written, could save lives. I want to give you one example, then I'll go back to Tunisia. Iraq 2007. It was February. An Apache helicopter is flying over Iraq, and they see two Iraqis holding up their hands in a surrender sign. The soldiers in the Apache helicopter are not rogue. They call back to base and they say, what should we do? These guys look like they're surrendering or something. And the lawyer at the base tells them, this is according to the Iraq documents that were released by WikiLeaks, and no one's ever questioned the authenticity of these. You know, Julian Assange, as a figure himself, would be much more important if people thought he wrote these. But he didn't. WikiLeaks just released them. These are written by low-level soldiers, logs of what happens every day, officers, in the case of the State Department cables, ambassadors and staff in the U.S. Embassy in places around the world. Incredibly revealing. It's why the New York Times has worked with WikiLeaks. It's why the Washington Post and the Guardian in London and El País in Spain and Der Spiegel in Germany have all worked with WikiLeaks in releasing these documents. So this helicopter unit hovering overhead calls back to base, says, what should we do? The lawyer at the base says you cannot surrender to a helicopter, so they blow these guys away. Now the gas in the room. I think people all over this country would have gasped. Whatever your political persuasion, like what? People were holding up their hands in a surrender sign. And so I think what would have happened is there would have been an investigation. I don't know what would have come of it, but this would have been brought to light if we knew this at the time. And then 6 months later, what happened perhaps would not have happened. That was July 12th, 2007. And WikiLeaks got a hold of the videotape of what happened here. And it wasn't an Iraqi videotape or a peace activist on the ground videotape. It was the videotape taken by the same Apache helicopter unit, hovering over an area of Baghdad called New Baghdad. And they see these men walking around in New Baghdad below them. Now, who these men were, they were local residents, and they were taking around 2 Reuters employees, an up-and-coming journalist, videographer named Namir Nur Eldin. He's like 22 years old. And Saeed Shema, Saeed Shama was a 40-year-old father of 4, and he was a driver for Reuters. Now, there's just a piece about drivers, but drivers are not just drivers in places of war. You know, international reporters come into a place, parachute in for a week or two to cover war. And it's their drivers, their fixers, who introduce them to people, to the lay of the land. They translate for them. In a sense, they are journalists too. And Saeed Shama was beloved by the Reuters community. It's a kind of tour guide with tremendous local information because they are from these communities. So Saeed and Namir have come to this area because it was bombed the day before. And the residents want to take them around, and they're filming. Namir is filming. And the helicopter, the same Apache helicopter unit that wasn't investigated 6 months before, is overhead, and they are filming. And you hear the cursing and the laughter of the soldiers inside. They call back to base. They ask for permission to open fire. They get it, and they blow the group of men below away. Saeed Shama is the one who's not quite dead. He's critically wounded. He's dragging himself away. You see it in the target of the video. And then a white van pulls up with 2 children and with some other people from the community to help the wounded. And they get permission to explode the van and also kill Saeed. And the whole group are killed. The 2 children are critically wounded, though they survive. Reuters news agency asked for years for this video. They knew it existed, that the military had it. They couldn't get it under the Freedom of Information Act. The military wouldn't release it. Only when WikiLeaks released it did they have evidence of the last moments of their journalist and their driver, the last moments of their lives. I dare say, if we had known what had happened 6 months before, that maybe Namir and Saeed would be working today, would be alive today. That's why this kind of information is important. I think the truth saves lives. So what does this have to do with Tunisia? Well, the State Department documents that were released right before the uprising indicated in the case of Tunisia how corrupt and brutal Ben Ali was, the dictator. It's not like the Tunisians didn't know this. But what they learned from the documents is that the US government knew it and still shored up Ben Ali to the tune of millions of dollars every year. And that just increased their rage. And then the Tunisian revolution inspired the Egyptian revolution. How many of you experienced the Egyptian revolution, at least partly, through the reporting of Democracy Now's Sharif Abdel-Qaddous? This great reporter who worked with us for 8 years here in the United States. He's an Egyptian-American, son of an illustrious Egyptian family. His grandfather is one of the most famous writers of Egypt, Sharif Abdel-Qaddous. And in January of 2011, he is getting texts from family and friends saying, "I will die for my country." And he's saying, these friends are not political. My country is changing. And he flies directly into Tahrir, okay, via Cairo. But he virtually stays there for the next 18 days. When he flies in, you know, Mubarak plunged Egypt into digital darkness. He turned off the internet. Well, actually, he didn't turn it off, but he got a US company, a California-based company called Naras, to flip the switch. There were years a way around the digital blockade. And his tweets are being cited by all the networks. And then Hani Massoud flies in. He's our video producer. I was just with him in Staten Island yesterday, where he was born. He's also Egyptian-American. He leaps tall buildings in a single bound. He played on the equivalent of the Egyptian national basketball team. You want him with you at your side in times of trouble. So he was with Sharif as they made their way through Tahrir. And Sharif did these remarkable interviews. And you met the community that was fomenting a revolution. It was not just a concept. It was not just a bird's eye view, though that was a pretty impressive view of 1 million people in Tahrir. It were the voices of the people themselves, who could have been your aunt, your granddaughter, your mother, your father. It was Hadef Souef, the great Egyptian writer who wrote Map of Love. It was Nawal Saadawi, the 79-year-old feminist, former presidential candidate. She'd written many books. She had been exiled under Mubarak, arrested under Sadat. She was holding salons even before Tahrir with young people who were so dispirited by the dictator, Mubarak. And she was saying, we will win, we will win. And Sharif was interviewing the high school kids who were putting out a broadsheet called Voices of Tahrir in the shadow of the state media building that had spewed lies for so many decades. And then Hani would take the video that he had filmed Sharif's interviews with, and he would jump over burning barricades. He would make his way again around the camels that were brought in to trounce the protesters, head off to Sharif's family's house, and put together these 20, 25-minute reports. Now, this was the time when the internet was back up, but the thugs had broken up the satellites. You know, the international news agencies, they broke into the U.S. news agencies, and they broke up their satellites. Now,